There was once a story, written in fire, but then buried beneath the ashes of empires. Not everyone knows this Eden was never in Europe. Not everyone was told Adam's skin was the color of earth. And once, God spoke in the tongue of Kush. In the first wind, across a land with no name, a covenant was written on the brow of humankind, not with ink, but with light, not with laws, but with memory. The voice enters soft. Lo, as if rising from a tomb of stone, you are dust. And yet, my breath lives in you, remember. But they did not remember. And so the story begins not with a bang, but with forgetting. The wind of Eden drifted through exiled bloodlines. The covenant's blood fell like summer rain, and no one remembered that it had once been sacred. This is not a story of religion. This is the story of a kingdom stolen, of children named as rebels when all they ever wanted was to go home. And if you're still here, if you can still hear this, then maybe you were one of them. The first day did not begin with light. It began with the earth, sighing. A warm breath rose from the deep, as if the earth were opening its eyes for the first time. But the first thing it saw was not the sun. It was a hand dark as ancient clay, gently lifting the ashes, shaping them into form. No rush, no sound, as if remembering, not creating. And when the form stood upright, life did not enter through the nose, but through memory. Memory of soil, memory of blood, memory of something known but never named. Adam opened his eyes, not surprised, not screaming, only a quiet gaze, as if he already knew. He knew because he had been Earth. He knew because the wind was still calling his name from within his chest. They say Eden was a garden, but no one says. It breathed, the grass whispered, the water sang, and the trees remembered. The tree of life stood at the center, a sacred drum rooted deep in the heart of Mother Earth, its branches stretching upward, reaching for the memory of heaven. And each time it trembled, a story was told. But not everyone was allowed to hear. The Lord came forth, not in white light, but in the hot wind from the south. His skin the glow of bronze, his eyes like fire smoldering low. You are me, and I am you. But you must remember, that was the first covenant. No paper, no ink, only the shared rhythm between creator and creation. Then he lulled Adam to sleep, and from his side, he drew out a piece of longing, shaped it into another form, not to be a partner, but to be a mirror. Eve opened her eyes, and for the first time, Adam saw himself in someone else. There were no fences in Eden, but there were boundaries, not to keep them out, but to test the heart. And the serpent, it did not slither. It stood, it spoke, and its voice was not evil. It was ancient, true, close. If you eat, you will not die. You will know. You will see as God sees. What moved Eve's hand was not hunger. It was thirst. Thirst to know, to see, to touch the forbidden, herself. And when her teeth met the fruit, she did not eat alone. All of humankind bit into the forgotten memory. Adam swallowed, not from force, but because he would not leave her alone in a world coming undone. The sky turned, the wind fell still, the trees stopped telling stories, and the Lord's footsteps drew near, not like thunder, but like a father searching for a child hiding in play. "Where are you?" The question was not for the body. It was for the soul that had forgotten who it was. And from that moment the world fell, not into sin, but into forgetting. Adam and Eve were not cursed. They were sent carrying the seed of the covenant hidden in their blood, waiting for the day it would bloom again. When someone remembers they are dust and light. After Eden closed its gates, the sacred winds fell silent. Adam and Eve did not die, but the immortality within them was replaced by time. Each heartbeat was a step farther from that first light. They bore children, and the bloodline began to branch. Cain, the firstborn, was not just the brother who killed. He was the first to carry envy in a world that had never known it. When his hand rose to strike Abel, the ground did not only take the blood, it trembled, as if it remembered the old light and knew that light was leaving. God came, not in anger, but in sorrow. He asked, "Your brother's blood cries out to me from the earth." From that day, humankind built cities, cast idols, forged weapons. They multiplied but forgot where they came from. They took stone and raised towers not to worship, but to forget. Babel was not just a monument of pride, it was a memory distorted. God did not shatter the tower, he fractured the tongue. Speech, the symbol of communion, became a barrier. And from that moment, nations scattered like shards of a broken mirror. Yet within the scattered bloodlines, a flicker of memory remained. An unspoken mark, a heartbeat that still remembered the covenant. And then a man emerged, Abram. He was not a king, not a priest, just a man who could still hear the voice in the wind. Leave your country, leave your kin, go to the place I will show you. God gave no map, he gave a promise. And that promise was not written in stone, but etched into the soles of his feet. Each step became a stroke of ink. Abram walked, and every step was an answer to Eden. Every time he lifted his eyes to the stars, a memory stirred awake. And God renewed the covenant, no longer with all of humankind, but with a lineage, a bloodline chosen not because they were worthy, but because they still remembered. But it would not be easy. That bloodline would pass through slavery, through exile, through war, through rebellious kings, stoned prophets, and burning temples. Because each time they neared the covenant, they forgot. And each time they forgot, God reminded them, not with words, but with history. Because the Bible is not a book, it is a scar, a map carved into the bodies of those who never stopped searching for Eden within themselves. There were nights when Egypt's shadow covered Goshen, and yet a single lamp still flickered in the doorway of a slave's tent, not to light the path, but to keep memory alive. The children of Abram had grown into a people, but a people in chains, pressed to make bricks without straw, beaten, despised, forgotten, and perhaps forgetting, until a cry rose up not from the mouth, but from the blood. And God heard. It wasn't that God had forgotten. The promise had simply not reached its hour. Moses was not born a hero. His mother placed him in a basket not out of faith, but because there was no other choice. The Nile did not drown him because water, too, remembers Eden. He grew up in a palace, but the wind still called his name. One day, he killed, not from hatred, but because he could no longer bear to see blood spilled without a name. And he fled, not from cowardice, but because it was too soon to understand what covenant meant. Then, the bush burned, but was not consumed. In that fire there was no ash, only a voice. And the first thing God did was not to command, but to call. "Moses! Moses!" He answered, not with words, but by taking off his shoes, because he knew the ground beneath him had once been Eden. God did not command the plagues. He simply said, "Tell Pharaoh, let my people go, so they may serve me in the wilderness." Not to escape, but to meet. The wilderness was not a punishment. It was the forge of covenant. 10 plagues fell not as magic, but as mirrors. Each one shattered a god of Egypt, until the children of Israel remembered there is only one. The Passover night was not a miracle. It was a mark of blood, the mark of covenant, when their doors were smeared with lamb's blood. It was not because God needed to see, but because they needed to remember the blood still speaks. The Red Sea parted not just by wind, but by memory rising stronger than fear. And they walked, chains no longer on their feet, but freedom still foreign in their hearts. At Sinai, God did not shout, he wrote, with his finger into stone. Not because stone was precious, but because their hearts were too hard. They vowed, they worshipped, and they forgot. But God remained. In the tent, in the cloud, in the sound of trumpets each morning, in the manna each evening. Because the covenant was never a contract. It was love. The love of one who would not abandon those who had once known they were light. There once was a kingdom not because it had a king, but because it had a covenant. But that kingdom was torn not by swords, but by the hearts of its own people. After they entered the promised land, they built temples, anointed kings, raised walls, and thought they had returned to Eden. Saul was chosen, but he did not listen. David followed the one who sang to God with a heart bleeding truth. Then came Solomon, child of fire and repentance, who built a temple of gold and wisdom. That temple was a second Eden, but this time it was made of stone, not breath, within that holy place. The covenant was once more placed in the ark, but no one asked who still lives to remember it. Solomon died. His sons quarreled. The kingdom was torn in two, Israel to the north, Judah to the south. 2 bloodlines, one source, now turned enemies. The prophets began to rise. They wore no robes. They wore dust. They draped themselves in goatskins and carried swords in their mouths. Isaiah saw a light from a root that had gone dry. Jeremiah wept like soil after the rain. Ezekiel saw wheels of fire turning in the air. But the people would not listen. They listened to kings, to greedy priests, to promises of wealth that came from temples not from the covenant. God whispered through small sounds, but they only listened when the thunder came. And the thunder came. Babylon. No need for new weapons, only hearts already rotted. The temple burned, the ark vanished. Memory had no refuge. The people were taken in chains across the Euphrates. The songs of Jerusalem became lullabies of captives. In exile, they had no king, no temple, only the words of the prophets like an old wind stirring through foreign dust. Daniel saw beasts great and terrible, but among them, one like a son of man. And he was not afraid, because he remembered. In Babylon, there were still Jewish children who lit a lamp each night, though no one commanded it. They redrew the map not with geography, but with memory. And in that darkness, a promise began to flicker. A shoot shall rise from the stump of Jesse. A child will carry a light that cannot be extinguished. The covenant is not dead, it is sleeping, in the blood, waiting to wake at the cry of a newborn in a manger. That night, there was no crown, no trumpets, no ceremony, only a cry, the first cry of a child in a manger surrounded by dung and straw. And yet, in that place, the covenant began to breathe again. His name was Jesus, but the angels called him Emmanuel, God with us. That blood did not come from a throne, but from the womb of an unwed girl. No one knew, but all of heaven held its breath. Each step he took as he grew, another chapter of the old covenant came back to life. Not in ritual, but in flesh, in bone, in tears. He knew hunger. He knew thirst. He knew anger. He knew how to weep. And he knew how to remember. In the wilderness, when the adversary came, it brought no sword, only distorted memory. He did not answer with miracles, but with ancient words, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. He healed not to perform wonders, but to remind them of Eden, where pain had no place. He called 12 not scholars, not priests but fishermen, tax collectors, rebels, men the world had forgotten but the covenant remembered. He preached not in temples but on hillsides, from boats, under trees, and every word was rain falling on dry ground. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. When he touched the leper, no one dared watch. But the earth remembered that hand had once shaped man from dust. He entered the temple not to worship, but to overturn the tables, because the temple had forgotten it was built to hold the covenant, not silver and gold. He knew the hour had come. No one forced him. He walked toward it. The Last Supper was not farewell, but a rebirth of the ancient rite. Bread his body, wine his blood, the new covenant. At Golgotha he was not taken. He gave himself, and his blood fell like the lamb's blood in Exodus. The veil in the temple tore in two. There was no more divide between humanity and the Creator. 3 days later, the tomb was empty, not because the body was lost, but because life had returned. He did not ascend a throne, he ascended to the heavens. But before he did, he said, "Go, make disciples of all nations, and I will be with you, even to the end of the age." The old covenant lives again, not in an ark, but in the hearts of those who still remember where they came from. The fire from Pentecost did not go out. It spread from lips to hearts, to feet that had once trembled. Peter, the one who had denied, now stood in the square, and his voice rang like the trumpet at Sinai, "Repent, for the kingdom has drawn near." 3,000 were baptized, not by ritual, but by memory awakened. But the new covenant was not peaceful. It shook empires, because no empire can abide a kingdom unseen where the king was crucified, and the law is love. Rome burned, persecuted, threw them to beasts, raised the sword. But the more blood was spilled, the stronger the covenant grew, because that blood had already flowed from a cross. Paul, once the persecutor, now wrote from prison about freedom. Not freedom from chains, but freedom from forgetting who we are in him. The temple in Jerusalem was destroyed in the year 70. Once again, the covenant lost its resting place. But this time, it did not need a temple. It lived in living bodies, the church. No longer one nation, but all nations, every tongue, every language. The Ethiopian read Isaiah in his chariot. Philip appeared not by chance, but because the old covenant remembered the children of Kush. The black, the slave, the woman, the Greek, the Roman all heard the same echo. "You are the blood I have remembered." The disciples scattered. Each carried a piece of memory, a small flame, a fragment of the unfinished covenant. But then, forgetting came again. The church became an institution. Truth was polished by power. God was painted white. Eden was moved far away, into the sky. The blood that was once set free now bound beneath the rusted cross of empire. But not all was lost. In forests, in caves, in secret manuscripts, the covenant still breathed. In the songs of slaves, in the rhythm of native drums, in whispered rites before dawn, the memory still murmured. And one day, those who were once silenced will rise in voice. Those who once bowed before thrones of men will stand upright in light. Because the covenant was never the property of one people. It belongs to all who still remember. They came from Eden. No one expected that the covenant would rise again from the chained continent. Africa, once cradle of Eden, now turned prison for those who carried ancient memory in their blood. They were captured, beaten, renamed. But one thing was never taken: the drum. The drum was not just music. It was code. It was cipher. It was language before language, Earth's voice calling upward, the ancestors whispering through wind, on slave ships, in the dark belly of the hull. Someone still tapped a forbidden rhythm against the wood, a lost song summoned back. In Haiti, in Dahomey, in Charleston, in Bahia, the rites continued in new shapes, under white crosses, but the soul still called to the Orisha, still spilled chicken blood, still salted the earth. Because the covenant had not died, it had only changed form. In midnight vigils, black men and women read the Bible not as the conquered, but as descendants of the once promised. They saw themselves in Moses, in Joseph sold, in Jesus crucified by empire. And they knew if the covenant once freed the Jews from Egypt, it would come again. The slave songs called spirituals were not for comfort. Every lyric was prophecy. Go down, Moses, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Every verse a code, a map, a silent declaration. We have not forgotten. Then the movement rose from Nat Turner to Marcus Garvey, from Martin Luther King to Malcolm X, from those who held the cross to those who raised the black fist. Not all the same, but all heard something rising from the soil. The covenant is calling, not just priests, but rappers, healers, single mothers, and children pushed to the edge of the street. In Harlem, in Soweto, in Cité Soleil, in Saigon's alleys. The blood is rumbling. No temple needed, no priest required. Just a nod, a remembering. I am dust, and I am light. And once again the night is shifting. Because someone has remembered the old song. Someone has lit the old flame. Eden is not in the sky. Eden is wherever a soul remembers it was sacred. And the kingdom is returning. Not from the clouds, but from the blood. And then the door opened. Not the door of heaven, but the one inside those who still carry memory. The memory that they were once breathed into, that they are dust, infused with light. In the final book, Revelation, it is not the end of the world. It is the end of forgetting. It is the promise fulfilled. John saw a holy city, but there was no temple, because the Lord himself was the temple. There was no sun, because God himself was the light. There was no night, because death no longer had a place. And at the center of that city, a river. And on both sides the tree of life, as in Eden before. But now, unguarded, the nations entered, no longer divided by skin or country or past. Their names rewritten not in ink, but in flame. No more tears, no more cries of injustice, no more chains, no more war. Only the covenant alive, breathing, burning within each soul who remembers who they are. And from the throne, a voice declares, I will be their God, and they will be my people. Eden returns not by force, but by remembrance. Not by weapon, but by light ignited from within. Those once cast aside are now the pillars. Those once called wilderness are now the sanctuary. The mute children now sing the song of triumph. Because the kingdom is not in the pages, but in the bones. Because Revelation is not the end, it is the return of the bloodline that never left. And if you are still here, still listening, then maybe you are the final link. The flame is about to be passed. The kingdom is waiting for you to call it by name with your own heartbeat. Pimpau. And if you are still here, perhaps your soul has just been touched in the deepest place. At Tales of Black. Every story is a ritual, a reminder that some memories aren't written in books. They're written in bone and blood. If something in this story stirred you, share it with someone else who's still searching. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapter. And if you carry a legend, a memory, or a haunting you want to hear spoken aloud, leave your offering in the comments below. Who knows, your story may be the next to rise in fire.